Well, hello everybody. My name's Louise Savage of Louise Savage Muses. A warm welcome to my channel if you are viewing it for the very first time, and an equally warm welcome if you are a returning viewer. So I have on and off over the course of the last 12 months or so picked up some books that are all written by women, 4 books in fact, all written by female authors who I feel I sort of have a gap in my knowledge. Authors that, one of them I've read before, but the other 4 not. And they're all authors that I remember seeing on bookshelves when I was a young woman. They were on the bookshelves of my mum's friends, lots of whom were sort of teachers and, you know, middle class educated women. And my mum wasn't from that particular background. So I used to be fascinated by their bookshelves. And these are all names that I remember seeing on those shelves and not necessarily names that appeared on my mum's bookshelf. And for whatever reason, they are women that I have not read before. I might have already just said that, sorry. And it's been really interesting because they come from various different points in the 20th century, and there are some sort of threads, I suppose, that run through these novels. And actually, if I'd read them without knowing their chronology and then put them into chronological order, I don't think I would have predicted necessarily, particularly the oldest, the earliest written of the 4, that it would have been placed where it is. And I am going to talk about them in chronological order, so forgive me if some of the details are a bit vague because a couple of them I read quite a while ago, but I really wanted to talk about how important I think it is to go back and read novels from the past, and particularly from thinking about the perspective of female writers and female fiction, and why that fiction is so important in terms of capturing moments in time and the development of women's psychology and women's attitude to the world. So the first book that I read was, or not the first I read, actually I read it quite recently, but this is the first one in terms of chronology, and I think this book was published in 1918, and it's Katherine Mansfield's Prelude. I didn't even know, in my ignorance, that she had spent most of her childhood in New Zealand. She was British, but she lived over in New Zealand. And this is actually 3 short stories. The first one is called The Prelude, and the 3 stories all focus on the same family in the same place at slightly different points in time, but I don't feel as though the stories are spread apart by decades or anything like that. And The Prelude is simply, and I say simply, the story of a house move, a family moving from town, from an urban setting to the countryside. And it's told from, you sort of go into each of the characters' heads at different points in time. So there's the father, who's very much the businessman, the breadwinner who seems to adore his wife, the mother slash wife who seems quite highly strung to me, and her mother who's kind of always wearing an apron. And I almost thought when I first started reading it that she was a domestic servant, but actually she is the grandmother in the house. And then there are, if I remember rightly, 3 daughters, one of whom is called Kezia, and I think the thinking is that her character is a portrayal of Katherine Mansfield herself, because this story reflects her own biographical details. And so I think it's, you know, it's written from personal experience, although that experience has been fictionalized. And it's the most beautifully written psychological study of what that movement means to each member of the family, and how they all view it differently. The father's very excited, it's what he really wants. But the other thing that really struck me was the way that she captures the interplay between the children, and every single character Now, not every single character, but some of the characters, particularly Kezia and her mother, slip into this kind of almost like dreamlike state. So you really are encouraged to explore their psychology, to explore their fantasies. You know, they'll be sat there and something will appear in front of them that isn't actually physically there, like we all do. You know, it's sort of really reflects our own interior, not monologue, that's not right, but what we visualize as human beings, if we can, because not everybody can produce visual pictures in their brain. I'm aware of that. So I found it extraordinary. I thought the descriptions of the gardens and the house, really detailed. And what I hadn't realised either was that Virginia Woolf was heavily influenced by Katherine Mansfield. She really admired Mansfield's work, and I wish I could remember the quote. She said something really extraordinary when Katherine Mansfield unfortunately died in her 30s, and Virginia Woolf made some comment about a rival being dead. I can't quite remember how she phrased it, but she also said, "Oh, here we are. Yeah, I was jealous of her writing. The only writing I've ever been jealous of." That was Virginia Woolf speaking. And actually, having read, you know, things like Mrs. Dalloway, I can really see. I feel like Virginia Woolf was influenced by Katherine Mansfield. So I look forward to reading. She mainly wrote short stories. I'm not even sure if she wrote any novels at all. And because I think because she was aware that her life was going to be cut short, she was terminally ill. I think she sort of had a kind of ferocious writing experience towards the end of her life. And the other thing about this woman, and some of the other women actually that I've picked up on, is they had the most extraordinary lives themselves. I mean, Katherine Mansfield's life would be worthy of a novel. In fact, if anybody knows of one, I wouldn't be surprised if there is a fictionalized version of her life, because you know, she was married several times. On a couple of occasions she married and then left the same evening, left the relationship. She also had lots of affairs, you know, and lived in various different places, and obviously was incredibly creative. She mixed with very famous authors of the period, the Bloomsbury Group and so on. So I think I'm sort of eager to go on a journey of discovery with this particular author. It's a great book. And then I read Doris Lessing's The Fifth Child. Now, I might have got my chronology, but I have got my chronology wrong here. I'm gonna backtrack now. I've mixed the books up, actually. That's not right. So I've just finished reading. Ignore what I just said. Sort your life out, Louise. Oh, aren't I colour coordinated with this book cover? Look, it's a really spooky cover. And this is Vera by Elizabeth von Arnim. And again, I've never ever read any of her books, and yet I've seen these Red Spines collection of her vintage books when I've been in bookshops and so on. And this was written, I don't know if I just said it, sorry, I seem to, apologies if you're getting a lot of repeated information. It's a bit stream of consciousness today. I don't know where my head is. So this was written in 1921, and the reason I know that is I checked, because there are real Rebecca vibes about this book. It's called Vera, and it's about a young woman who lives with her father. He's the only relative that she has apart from his sister, who is her aunt. And she lives with her father, and her father at the beginning of the novel is dead. He's died that morning, and she's outside the house. They've gone down to Cornwall in the hope that he will recover from whatever illness it is he's been suffering from. So she stood at the front of her house in the garden in Cornwall, and this man walks past, and he walks past, and then he comes back, and he starts talking to her. And the reason he comes back is because he's noticed how attractive she is. And it turns out that his wife died a few weeks prior to this, and he becomes this sort of rock for her to express her grief to. He helps organise the funeral. He makes himself indispensable. and forms a relationship with Vera. Vera's aunt is at first approving and then gradually becomes less so. And the novel gets creepier and creepier and creepier. And it's one of the best descriptions of coercive control that I think I've read in many, many years, with the possible exception of the Axeman's Carnival. I think if you like the Axeman's Carnival, you'd like this. It's also sort of slightly comic. I really like the tone of it. I feel as though Elizabeth von Arnim is almost despairing of Vera's innocence and the way she sort of commits to this man so quickly. Equally, she's horrified by him, and I love the way that she exposes his absolute inadequacies. His controlling behaviour is born out of the fact that he is just such a shallow human. And I could not put this down. I found it really fascinating. And the similarities between Rebecca and this book are because Vera is the name, I might have misspoken earlier, Vera is the name of his first wife. The protagonist of the novel is called Lucy. And the shadow of Vera, particularly when they go to the husband's house, the shadow of Vera in that house is really, really creepy. And you know, she's died in very, very mysterious circumstances, shall we say. I'm dancing around because I don't want to give too much away, but I have absolutely loved reading this, and will definitely be I know I've got another von Arnim on my shelf, and thank goodness I have, because I'm really looking forward to reading it. If you like Edith Wharton, it's got a kind of Whartonish vibe about it as well. So, oh, and also, I think she and Katherine Mansfield were related in some way. Can't remember whether they were cousins, sisters-in-laws, but there is a connection between the two of them. So that's interesting as well. Now, Rebecca, because I checked when I was reading this, I thought, oh, this is, you know, she's read Rebecca and she's, you know, she's kind of plagiarized it a little bit. But actually, this book was written in 1921, and I think Rebecca was written in 1938. So I suspect Daphne du Maurier may have read this. And again, that's something I'm not aware of. So if anybody knows, I'd be very, very interested to find out. And then I read, no, not in that order. The next book I'm going to talk about, oh my goodness. I wonder if anybody's still watching this after I've just rambled on incoherently. It definitely is amusing today, although I think the muses would have been a bit more skilled. So anyway, this is Margaret Drabble's The Millstone, and I read this absolutely ages ago. It was written in 1965, so we've jumped several decades now. And again, I'd never read anything by Margaret Drabble before, but I was very well aware of her on those bookshelves, as I say, when I was growing up. And 1965, this book was published 2 months before I was born. So that was quite interesting, thinking about her concerns in this novel, because The Millstone, the title, I think, is really, what's the word, sinister, slightly unpleasant, because the main character in this novel is a young woman who is very highly educated. She goes to Cambridge. She's got very forward-thinking socialist parents. During the course of the novel, the parents are out of the country and she is living in their flat. I think they've gone to Africa. And she has a very sort of strained relationship with sex. So she kind of feels like she should have sex because that's kind of what everybody's doing, although this isn't the swinging 60s yet. But certainly in her sort of set of friends. And her first sexual experience is awkward. And as the result of that experience, she becomes pregnant, hence the title, I think, The Millstone. But I don't think that's the only millstone in the novel. And she decides not to tell her parents. She decides not to tell the father. She later thinks that the father may be bisexual. Not that that's relevant, really. And And by the time she's sort of narrating, or she's not narrating, by the time the story is unfolding, she's got two lovers, as it were. She's not playing them off against each other, but her friends are all aware that she's got these two men in her life. They all assume that the father must be one of these men. It isn't. So it's this really kind of murky, but not described as murky, situation where she is withholding so much information. Her sister, she expects that, she thinks her sister's going to be really supportive, but her sister writes to her and says, you need to have an abortion. She makes a few failed attempts to do that, but doesn't, and ends up having the baby. I'm giving things away, but actually this is not really a plot-driven novel at all. It's exploring her situation and her sort of desire to continue. She's a researcher. Her desire to continue exploring poetry and things like that whilst having this child. And the child, of course, does destroy things, does make life very difficult. I didn't really enjoy this book. I know I'm talking about it enthusiastically, or I hope I am, but there was something about it that really did not chime with me at all. I don't think I liked the protagonist very much, and I didn't like the sort of subterfuge, and having been a single mother myself, and being confronted with some of the decisions that she makes, I think very, very differently from the way that she does, and I found that quite hard. And that's not fair, because I'm not suggesting that everybody should approach life like I do, if you see what I mean. But I don't think I would have liked the woman if I'd met her very much. But it brings me to something that connects these books, and particularly the next one I'm going to talk about, and that is, the challenges that society imposes on women. This is a book about a woman who is simply trying to, explore her sexuality, trying to continue in an academic world, and just how challenging and difficult that is. In the same way that in the Prelude, particularly the mother character, there's a lot. She's got 3 daughters, and there is so much pressure on her to have another child, because she hasn't had a boy yet. And then with Vera, there's the way that her sort of sexuality and her situation are completely controlled by the man in her life. But those impositions don't just come from him. They come from the world in which she has grown up, where she has been encouraged to be naive and innocent and sweet. And even though her father is very well read, has encouraged her to be well read and to discuss things, so she's grown up in a male arena. Her father's friends come to the house a lot, and she's invited to get involved in discussion. None of those things have adequately prepared her for the life that she might potentially create. So she ends up being kind of imprisoned, and I find all of that really depressing. And I just hope that things are very different for women, certainly growing up in contemporary Britain, but I'm not totally sure that they are. Anyway, the next one and the final book I'm going to talk about is Doris Lessing's The Fifth Child. Now, I have read at least one of Doris Lessing's novels many years ago. But this book really intrigued me. And again, I read it a long time ago, but my goodness, has it stayed with me. I think of all, no, that's not fair. They've all made an impression. But this one really, it's actually described as a horror story. And I would say that it's horror at its best, because there isn't, it's not blood and guts and gore. It's not that kind of horror, but my goodness, it's terrifying. So if you're somebody who likes to be, frightened, put on edge when they read, I think this is really a book for you. So it focuses on a married couple who are incredibly happily married. I mean, almost like gushingly so. They're the envy of all their friends. They have a house that they fill with friends. They've got 4 children, 2 girls, 2 boys. They're living a sort of perfect existence until they have their 5th child, Ben. And this child grows really quickly. This child behaves in a way that none of their other children have. And the child turns into, well, right from the word go, even in the womb, is this kind of monster. And because the novel is so full of domestic detail, because they've already got these children who are all sort of perfectly settled, the way that the horror and the you know, the sort of the mother and father, both the mother and father's attitude to this child, how they are desperately trying to love it, but they are so unsettled by it, and that sense of creep, really, oh my goodness, well, it's the sort of book that could give you nightmares. I think if I remember rightly, there were a few moments where I cringed. I think there are some slightly politically incorrect things in here, which is interesting because this novel was published in 1988, so it's the most recent of all of them. But in some ways, it perhaps has some of the slightly more old-fashioned sentiment in it, I would say, things that might make a reader, particularly perhaps a reader in their 30s or 40s, wince, because it's reflecting, the attitudes and values in 1988. But I think this is a rip-roaring read, and I'm really glad I read this book. And I do, again, want to return to other works that Doris Lessing has written. Yeah, I mean, even look, the image on the front is really quite terrifying. So I'm hoping that in 2025 I will read some more of these retro books, because they really offer a lot of food for thought about women's situation in the world. And I'm very aware that all 4 of these books are from a very sort of white middle class stance. And I know I've sort of read things like Octavia Butler this year for the first time and things like that, or last year, but I also feel like I've got real gaps there as well, looking at writers of colour from earlier on, in the last century. So yeah, work to be done, Louise. So yeah, I hope you found that interesting, and I really hope it's sort of tempted you to perhaps go and explore some of these writers who are in danger of disappearing out of existence if we're not careful. As you know, I'm a real fan of the Women's Prize, and I think one of the things that we women owe the world is to keep the trailblazers' names alive and in popular consciousness if we can, and keep those books appearing on bookshelves. I don't think any of those books are out of print, but I could be completely wrong about that. And also I know many of you who watch this channel will probably have already read some, if not all, of those books, because I know a lot of you are of my generation, and please let me know your thoughts, and also direction to me for further reading of these particular writers. Where would you go next would be, I would love to know. So thank you for putting up with my meandering mind today. And I hope you're off, I don't know, enjoying the day. I hope you're doing some interesting reading, yeah, look forward to chatting to you again very soon. Take care, everybody. Bye.